Okay.
Just preparing to setting it up. Going live. Okay. And we are on the air.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone.
Welcome.
What I'd like to do first, since very few of us have met each other in person, is just go around and give a little background and say who you are. So I guess I'll start. I'm Steve Nutz. For most of my career, I've made my living as a designer, art director, creative director. I ended up working for some large financial companies like Price Waterhouse. But for the last 10 years, I've been on my own. I also have a fine arts background and have kept that up and as a painter and printmaker. And I moved here to Upper Darby in 1994. I have 5 kids, all grew up here, went to all the public schools. And they are all very happy to have grown up in Upper Darby and their background here. And I've long been wanted to promote the community. I think we've had some PR problems here, but there's a lot to be celebrated. And this commission I think can really help with that. So looking across the screen, I guess Scott is the next one over for me. You want to go, Scott?
Yes, I'm not actually a member of your commission. I am a township employee appointed to serve as secretary. So I'm but your humble servant enabling this, and you can always reach out to me directly, for administrative support with all of the work that you're doing, and it's my job to make appropriate township resources available and to help you guys, navigate the sometimes difficult bureaucracy of being part of a government commission.
Kathy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Wilt. I'm a 15-year resident of Upper Darby, and I chose it because it's extraordinarily convenient, and I think that we don't take enough credit for that. It's a great location. I told people when I moved here because I could live my entire life and work in Philadelphia and never have to get on the Schuylkill Expressway. So I just think it's a great place, and I agree with Steve. We have some opportunity to really promote all kinds of things about Upper Darby, so I'm really glad to help. This is the first time I'm formally involved in helping with Upper Darby. And my background is I am both a librarian, a teacher, and I have 30 plus years in nonprofit organization management. My specialty has been on computers and the computer side, and in non-print media, negotiating major $1 million deals for electronic content for libraries, running interlibrary loan systems. And I've had considerable experience in managing federal and regional grants for historic collections in libraries and museums and artifacts. And that includes with the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Sloan Foundation, et cetera. So I'm really excited to be able to lend my expertise. I also am particularly enamored of the role in history and the importance of Sellers Hall, and also the Tower Theater, because I'm also a musician. I've spent many wonderful hours in the Tower Theater, and I think those are just two of among many that we need to make sure for our current residents in the future that we're maintaining them properly. So thank you. Oh, and I'm also suffering from shoulder surgery. So, I hope I know not
behind you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not typing right this minute, Nick. And I hope I don't doze off. I'm not on main painkillers right now, but anyway. Thank you.
Nick? Mr.
Uh,
Hoyt?
I am, my name is Nicholas Hoyt. I'm a lifelong resident of the township, born and raised in the Stonehurst Hills section. When my wife and I got married in '06, we bought a house over here in the Garrettford section. I went through public schools, Stonehurst, Beverly Hills, Upper Darby, as did my siblings. My father went through Beverly Hills. He grew up, actually, Steve, right in your neighborhood, and graduated from there in the '70s. My kids are currently going through Upper Darby Public Schools. So this is where I was born and raised. And about several years ago, I started getting frustrated with some of the things that were going on, started getting active. There's an abandoned lot at the top of my street where there used to be a gas station. And, I remember speaking with some folks with Upper Darby's rich history of the Underground Railroad and it running adjacent to the trolley, that it would be a great opportunity if we could acquire that property from SEPTA and maybe have some sort of an Underground Railroad Memorial Plaza right there. Garrett worked with Harriet Tubman, really went to try and find some roots there. Struggled getting where I needed to go. I ended up running for council unsuccessfully in 2017, but still managed to stay in contact with doing things like neighborhood cleanups. I sat on the board for Drexel Hill Little League for the last few years. I've been working with other youth sports leagues, trying to make sure that every kid in the township, not just those of us on this side of Lansdowne Avenue, are getting access to this, the youth sports. The Darby Creek Valley Association cleanups that they have on Earth Day, a whole host of things. I'm sure there's some things I'm missing out that I'm certainly proud of that I didn't get involved in. Oh, yes, the Hometown Heroes banners, which those of you who've been in the emails have seen. I've been working with trying to get veterans from our township recognized in the way of the Hometown Hero banners, as you see in other townships like Haverford, and Marple with Broomall, the Broomall Rotary Club doing them, Upland and so on. Just trying to get different things, as others have already stated, trying to promote the good that the township has, the great that we've always had, and the future that we have still in front of us.
That's great. Thank you. Samiha, you have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Samiha Ershad. I have lived in Upper Darby for the last 9 years. Now that my 8th grade year is over, I am a freshman at Marian Mercy Academy. That's it. And it's very nice to meet all of you guys.
Nice to meet you too. Bart?
Okay, I'm muted. Hi, I'm Bart Everts, and I'm a relative newbie to Upper Darby. I moved here in 2018, before which I lived in the Walnut Hill neighborhood of West Philly. Professionally, I'm a librarian at Rutgers University Camden, but I also teach American history at Pierce College as an adjunct. I've written articles and things for Journal of PA History, the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia and Hidden City, Philadelphia, which actually got Upper Darby on my radar. There was that great article a couple of years ago on the kind of Art Deco history of Hidden City, of 69th Street and kind of the downtown area. I actually recently wrote an article on the Art Museum, which had a small branch location on 69th Street back in the 1930s. So I thought that was kind of interesting. As Kathy and Nick and everyone else had mentioned, I think Upper Darby, has a lot going for it that's sort of underappreciated. I think one, we're this transportation hub, kind of a direct line to Center City. We have all these great historic buildings, not just in the downtown, but in various neighborhoods from different time periods. So I was excited to be a part of this. Aside from that, I'm the community engagement chairperson for Upper Darby Pride, which Nick is also on. That's the one thing you forgot.
Sorry.
Many things you do.
There's a lot. I apologize.
On that too. So just make sure you get credit for that. Aside from that, I just look forward to working with everyone. I think this is a real opportunity to sort of have a greater appreciation of the history of Upper Darby, and kind of connect that to the future of Upper Darby. So I'm excited to join this group and hear from you guys.
Great, thank you. Bishop Thomas. Got it.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be a part of this meeting. I've moved to the township in 2007, and the church moved in 2010 to 3400 State Road. I've been pastoring the congregation for the last 25 years. We were in West Philadelphia and moved out here. And upon coming here, I became familiar with the great history and on a few occasions used the history of the township, the Underground Railroad, the abolitionists, as inspiration for the future. This place being a place of deliverance and empowerment. So I'm blessed to be a part of this community, and thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you. And Uma?
Hi everyone, my name is Ume Siddiqa. I am a rising senior at Upper Darby High School. I moved to Upper Darby in 2011 when I was just in 3rd grade. At the time, I didn't know English well, and the municipal library is basically where I found my calling. Going to that library, I got involved in different programs and I read books from there. And from that library, like now that I'm older, I did volunteering there, summer volunteering, and now I'm part of this program, Teen Advisory Board, which is where I found out about this. I'm really excited to be part of this because at my school, when I walk down the hallway in the main lobby, there's this big poster board where there's different sites of Upper Darby and how it looked in the past. And that really fascinated me. And I was very intrigued by like the rich history that our township had, but it was very mind-blowing that I was so unaware of it. And I did hear of the railroads. Like I heard of that, I think in middle school, and I was very intrigued. And I was like, wow, I never really knew all these things existed. So I'm very excited to be part of this community committee and hopefully help other people be aware of it too.
Great, thank you. Thank you,
Real-
everyone.
Steve, I'm sorry to cut you off real quick. I just want to take a second and say it's amazing and lovely that these two women, young women, are going to try and be a part or be excited for something like this. One, it's very rare that you get kids or young folks to be engaged in history and things of that. But here we have two kids over at the high school, and I just want to take a moment and I hope we all acknowledge the greatness that is. Beautiful. Thank you, girls.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, so to get into our meeting, I don't know if you have the agenda in front of you, but we were going to go through the history of this group. And there's very little information actually available. So I don't know, Scott, do you have anything that you can contribute about past groups and what they've accomplished or not accomplished?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the history of the Historical Commission as an entity. It evolved somewhat organically and unofficially, it seems, in the 1980s out of the Upper Darby Historical Society, and efforts being made to preserve, treasures like the Swedish Cabin, the Garrett House, Sellers Hall, all of these rich historical properties, the actual buildings themselves, the Valley House, which unfortunately we lost. There's a number of properties that were preserved, a number of properties where people fought to preserve them and were unsuccessful. And through the various, struggles, the township decided to form a historical commission, and they charged it with the mission of cataloging and making recommendations for the two categories of historic properties, ones that the township owns and manages, and ones that are on a list of protected properties. And it exists to make recommendations about those properties to the mayor. The second part of that mission would have involved the passage of a historic protection ordinance. And that just for various reasons, whenever you try to make any legislation happen, the devil's in the details. And to date, no township council has agreed on a historic preservation ordinance. There were at various times efforts in that direction. We do have the most recently, I think it was I believe it was 2015. There was actually a draft that was being worked on. But essentially, we operate under the rules that the Township Council created the commission and said that the mayor will create rules for its governance. And Mayor Jim Ward actually drafted the bylaws under which the Historical Commission is supposed to still be operating. I'm sure those will evolve and be improved upon now that it's been reinvigorated a little bit. Over the years, different members have worked on different projects that, since there was no preservation ordinance to work on, the Historic Commission sort of expanded its scope and delved into areas that some might think are more properly the domain of Historic Committee. And in fact, there was intended in the rules to be some sort of adversarial, or at least very segregated relationship between the nonprofit community organization that is the Historical Committee and the government entity that is the Historical Commission. I think the hope going forward is that could be, it's always been collaborative in reality, and I hope it would be more so. And I think there is bandwidth to do those other projects. And, but I think what the mayor's intention was, her hope is that we will move forward with the preservation ordinance and the business of preserving these treasures. I know that in the past, there hasn't been a whole lot of promotion and attention paid to the Historic Commission. And a lot of times, if you look at the old minutes of meetings, the way they're structured is there's space for people to come bring matters to the attention of the Historical Committee. And of course, if people didn't show up to the meeting, there wasn't much to discuss, or if Historical Commission members didn't attend, there wasn't a quorum. But at various times, there has been some activity. I know, Mr. Hoyt has been serving since, I believe, 2018, and can probably speak to some of the things that have happened during his tenure.
I believe by having Bishop Thomas kind of visit this as he is right now as a guest, he is doubling the size of all the participants that we've had in my tenure. So yeah, it's been not that well attended.
Yeah, and I think there's been good people who've served on it, and it's not been a lack of goodwill or effort, but sometimes if you don't get the mission and the push, or just circumstances get in the way and people aren't able to contribute what they thought they could contribute, we're just hoping that with some fresh faces, some new ideas, we can really make something happen. And there is some good stuff in the archives. I did go down to the sub basement. There's a basement to the municipal building. Some of you know it. If you've ever paid a parking ticket, there is a basement yet again below that. And it's an old evidence locker. It's a big safe, and there's boxes and archives. And I did dig up all of the extant records of the Historical Commission. So it may be a project that a member wants to take on themselves, to do some cataloging and to do some organization of that. There's some neat stuff, some correspondence, some old minutes. You could sort of do the history of the Historical Commission if you wanted to. I don't know if that's the most crucial bit of business facing us, but these resources are available, and I'm happy to connect folks with that stuff if they are interested in exploring it.
Hey, thanks, Scott. So let's move on to, it might look like there's a lot on the agenda, but the most important thing is under the focus for 2020 is to complete a survey and to write and propose for adoption an historic preservation ordinance. Now, the survey, there was one done, I believe, in 2007 and an update in 2014. And there's a lot done already. We can probably reuse a lot of that material. And yet, we do have to update it. And we have to, I found this information, I didn't know anything about it, got this information really from someone named Kate Clifford. She's a planner at Delaware County Planning Department in media. And she is just fantastic. She can basically fill us in. So I learned a lot before I was on this commission already. I had been in contact with her and I learned a lot from her. But this, it's a kind of a shame we can't look at a survey together. But the survey includes the numbers and the properties, the locations of the properties, photographs, elevation, history, and something called a story. So the story of that particular building. Now, Kate thinks that we need to do that, update that material, take new photographs, get it into her. She actually will enter it into Google Map for us. She's already doing this. We also need to add other properties that might need to be protected. There's 125 on the list. So I hopefully after this meeting, we can find one of the versions that's the most representative and get a link to all of you so you can just get a look at that.
Do you have a list of a couple of those properties, perhaps? Not all of them, just, you know, off the top of your head, some of them.
Yeah, there's a rather long list. Some of them are well-known that you've heard of.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of them that are just addresses, and sometimes 4 consecutive addresses. And those are kind of a mystery to me. One of the good things about it, though, is we have Google Maps now. And so from home, you can kind of get an idea where these properties are and maybe even get a look at them. But it's a lot to do. There's a lot to do it just in that, and there are a lot of skills needed to complete that, but we have a substantial draft. Now, secondly, we have
Scott was trying to say something.
Okay.
The Google folder that I shared with you all does have those documents in there. So if you want to take a time to go through some of those folders when you get a chance, you can see it all. Everything that exists that you're going to be working from is there. And if you have any trouble accessing those folders, just send me an email and I'll work it out with you.
Yeah, the thing is, it is confusing, and I've been trying to go through them for several weeks, and I'm still just got a little bit better idea of the lay of land. That's why I'm hoping to find something that, well, probably the 2014 survey is the one you want to look at first. At any rate, going on to the ordinance. This week, Barbara Ann sent Scott and myself a draft ordinance that someone put together. And so that's wonderful. It was never adopted, but we have a draft to work with. In addition, we were pointed to Radnor's, which is available online. And I read both of them this week. Radnor has some good language we could add to ours. The biggest thing lacking in the Upper Darby draft so far is the fact that it only talks about demolition. And I think we really need to talk about alterations. We need to protect alterations also. So if we can get these 2 things accomplished, what happens after that is if someone goes and gets a demolition permit or an alteration permit from the township, and our property or neighborhood, it doesn't necessarily have to be just one particular address. It can be a neighborhood, it can be a district that can be protected. They will have to come to us to look at the plans. If there's something that we don't like, there will actually be a public hearing, and the developer will have to state his case. We'll have to state our case, but then we can make a ruling on whether that goes forward or not. So the commission would really have some clout, some power. As it is now, we have absolutely none because we don't have an ordinance. Does that make sense? Yeah. Kathy?
Unmute here. Sorry, I had to unmute. So it's this group that would do the review and analysis, or is it council?
Council has to pass the ordinance.
At the, oh, I'm talking about the review of any
Right.
projects. Okay.
Council has to
Right.
pass the ordinance, but after that, at least if we follow Radner's model, this group would actually rule on whether a project can go forward or not.
Okay. And is that,
I think
that's what the mayor wants to do? Is that the way she wants it set up?
we're discussing it here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Haven't discussed it with Barbara Ann yet.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Mhm.
But I thought that was really a compelling part of the Radner.
Sure.
Um,
Well, and Steve, if I could add here too, and I'm sorry if this is duplicative information for everybody, but the thing that happened that came to my awareness and concern that we didn't have an ordinance was there was recently some demolition done at the end of last year. And there's a property that I never saw called the Lukens Mansion. Am I saying this correct?
Yes.
And because we did not have an ordinance, we could not even review whether or not it should be, the demolition should be stopped. At any rate, that particular example, I've heard people use that as the reason to move forward.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate depiction? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'd add too, if you're looking through the ordinances, even basic things that are ordinances like signage on historic buildings. I mean, I keep thinking of that Art Deco building that's the school for TOEFL and things like that. They consistently have a giant sort of, I'd say paper, but it's not actually paper, just sign thrown over there. And according to the Upper Darby ordinances, that is not something that's allowed. And I know the Supreme Court ruling said that, you know, you can't regulate on the actual type of sign if it's digital or whatnot, but you can on size. And that's also something that just seems like it hasn't been enforced.
That's probably true. I have no idea, but that's true. I believe that we would have notice of changes. So demolition or alterations, where someone would need a license or need a permit, I'm sorry, then we would review that. Other than that, I don't know. We could certainly write into our ordinance that some kind of oversight. I mean, I believe we can write it any way we want.
Yeah, I think it might be useful for the Historical Commission to have some oversight of ordinances already on the books regarding signage and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I particularly about signage, I believe they are working on something along that line. There's someone in the communications committee that I've heard is working on signage. I think it's a problem all over the township, actually. But I don't think it's necessarily just that, you know, our responsibility, unless it's on historic building.
I'd be cautious to some degree on that of that being something under our charge or somebody that's not an elected official's charge. I'd hate for, you know, a bureaucratic group or a group like ours to be caught in some sort of bureaucratic muck of, you know, picking and making that call. You know what I mean? We don't have a real example. I'm just saying I'd like to see what it is when that time comes. But
yeah, I wasn't suggesting us making the sole call. I was just, if you look at the existing ordinances, there are ordinances on signage that are not currently being enforced. And I think it's particularly notable on some of the Art Deco details in the downtown buildings, but.
Yeah, good point. So there is another thing that's not on the agenda. I really think we need to accomplish those two things, and that's a lot to do. But there is a third element that we could work on, and that is a style guide. As a designer, I've made many style guides for companies, This is a little different. There are existing materials. For instance, if a building is a certain type, that a certain historical building that has a kind of formatted style, National Park Service has some guidance, but I think it would be quite a difficult thing to do. But it's Kate Clifford again is urging us to have some kind of style guide so we could see whether that's doable. I'd like to move on to something that I think this will be a really interesting exercise for us. So if we as a commission actually had an ordinance, there are 2 current projects that we can look at. And Scott, can I share my screen? Do you need to turn that over to me, or? Let me just try it. Okay. Yeah. Scott, you have to allow me to share my screen.
Okay, I've made you a co-host. That should give you the ability now. Let me know if
Okay.
that-
Let me try it. Okay, can you all see this? All right.
Yep.
So there is a project that Delaware Community College has purchased the Bishop Prendergast High School property. And I've just learned about some of the aspects of that this week. And I did a little searching online to get some images. So this is the plan. I've gotten some photographs after this, but at this point, I want you to look at, if you look at the main building, that's what you see from the street, from the corner of Garrett and Lansdowne. You know, the big imposing building that's at the bottom. You'll see this new annex is kind of sticking out on the left-hand side and going back. And look at the proposed parking deck there. So here's a rendering from the architect. And you can see that projection coming out of the left side of the building, or the front of the building. Kate has made the comment, kind of reviewed this plan and said it maybe looks a little unbalanced. So that was one of her comments. Just personally, just looking at this, it sort of the back part of the building looks very generic 1960s and doesn't integrate that well. But I understand that if they put this entrance on, it would go, you know, it would probably work. Here's another rendering. And they did a rendering at night, just for reference. Now let's look at this plan again and see that parking deck area. Okay, that actually is, if you can see where Lansdowne Avenue is, and you can see the smaller building with a little parking lot on either side of it, that apparently is the last vestige of the mansion that was there. It's a carriage house. And in this plan, they're going to destroy that and put a parking lot there. Here's a little closer view of that building. And this is the kind of architecture we're dealing with. So in this case, we would have to do some research and see if it's actually was the carriage house, was part of the mansion. That's what I've heard, but I'm not sure. And there is a possibility, since this development's been put off a year, there is a possibility that we can put this on our list of historic buildings and maybe protect it. Okay.
So Steve, this is Kathy. They purchased this, correct, in September?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay,
I
I thought I
know the
saw
whole-
that on something. So I guess my question is, surely before Delaware County Community College purchased it, they made sure they had clearance. Is that not correct?
You know, well, there was no way of objecting to anything anyone wants to do on any property.
Yeah.
But I believe if we have things on the list, it's at least got to get a review. And at the minimum, there's a 30-day pause before demolition.
Gotcha. Okay. We don't know how old that building is, do we?
Now,
Okay.
but that would be something that, you know, it'd be worth someone taking that on, researching it and finding out. Now there's another current project just heard about, and that's for Theater 7000. That's much smaller. But Theater 7000 used to be the 69th Street Theater. And this is what it looked like years ago in the 1930s. It had this, you know, typically curved, like the Tower Theater marquee out front. This is what it looks like now, and the plans for doing some changes to the facade. They're described on the next page, but it's putting these LED, this, I guess they're going to do the cement work in front, and this small marquee or awning. This is a description of what they're doing, and another rendering that shows you what they are planning to do with the signage at the top. So, you know, I don't know what anybody thinks of this. I don't think that this building is, you know, that lovely in the beginning, but if I was designing it, I would want to do something that had maybe this shape, you know, at least it would have a reference to the theater. There's also, and I can send you guys the link for that. There's a wonderful video about the renovation of the interior, which looks fantastic, and basically done by Sweat Equity. There were a lot of students involved. And I just want to point out another thing that I've found out recently that I think is kind of exciting. There is a local business that's actually by the Produce Junction on Reed Road. You've probably passed it if you ever go over there. A young man who's the son of one of my friends works there, and he told me about the work they're doing. And I had no idea. It's really fantastic stuff. Most of it in Manhattan. It's metal work and glass work. And it's just beautiful stuff. And I think this might be a real nice, if we think about replacing the Tower Theater tower, you know, things like that, and maybe even for that facade. So I'm going to stop the share here. And where are we? I guess we said this would be time for public comment, but I'm not sure how that would happen. Scott, can you?
So I've been monitoring the email. No emails have come in. I've been checking the voicemail periodically. No calls have come in. I will continue to kind of, when you see that logo there, I'm probably doing something like that. I will continue to check the phones. If any messages come in, with your permission, I can always interject, and we'll take a little bit to transcribe them. And when I have some prepared towards the end of the meeting, if you'd like me to save them for then, or we can, you know, however you think. But so far we've had none. We're, you know, probably not the hottest ticket in town with historical preservation, but I will continue to monitor the lines in case someone does come forward with a comment.
Okay, comments from the group though. You'll have to unmute yourselves if you want to say anything.
I was just going to make a silly comment about what Scott said. We're only popular until somebody starts tearing something down. That would get real popular. So anyway, sorry.
They say you pave paradise and put up a parking
There
lot.
you go. Exactly right. I was singing the same song.
So looking at Bonner's website right now, they talk about the campus history and the mansion in which it stood burnt down in 1908 to the ground with only the gatehouse, which has served as the servants' quarter remaining. So I don't know if that's the house you're looking at, Steve.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, and it looks like that octagonal mansion on the site was built in 1882. No, that was when it was purchased. There's some stuff there on the website if anybody wants to go, bonnerprendy.com, and then there's a thing for school history to look
Okay.
upon yourself.
Yep. So to get these things accomplished, I just kind of put a list of ideas at the end of the agenda. Things skills we could use. One more comment about the last survey in 2014. If you look at it, when you get a chance to look at it, you'll see there's a cover page where a whole bunch of politicians, a whole bunch of other people, and some consultants were all involved in the survey. And so there must have been some budget behind it, some people hired. I mean, we need things like research. It's all in this list. We need to talk to property owners and realtors probably. We need photography, architectural knowledge, historic knowledge, PR communications, writing, fundraising. The last thing, application for Main Street. This is something that Upper Darby needs to do in general, but we could particularly benefit from, because once we have Main Street designation, there are a lot of state grants and even federal grants that we may be able to get, but mainly state money for various projects, including, I've heard there's a signage grant. Bart, we were talking about signage, and it's kind of thing where you can go to property owners, I understand it, and say, listen, we'll pay 50% of a new sign if you follow our guidelines or take advice from us, something like that.
Okay, that's good to hear. I feel like that's sort of proactive, not necessarily putting the emphasis on the business, but keep making them aware of grants and things like that. So
yeah. So any other comments?
Just real quick, you mentioned the local business with metalwork, and in that context, you mentioned the Tower Theater, replacing the tower on the Tower Theater. Is there anything in the works or discussions regarding that?
I have heard from the mayor that the township has had a meeting with the Tower Theater, which was very amicable, and they are talking about getting some replacement. I think that if one could bring them a design, an engineer's design for a tower, and we could get costs from this company for fabrication, it would be a tremendous help, I think. The original one, if you see the older pictures, had a cladding on it that didn't fit the building that well. The newer one was just sort of like a shape, like the skeleton of it. I think of things like what they did with the Twin Towers after they went down. They did a laser display for about a week, So I don't think you can have some creative ideas on the tower and still have it work as a reference to the old tower. Maybe we even get an artist to do the design. So that's just
I know
my thought.
as a golfer, it's a great loss for me, because on the 18th hole, I look out into the town, and that was always my my beacon that I would drive for the tower coming off of Cobb's, and now that it's not there, I'm blaming that for every slice into the next green.
Yeah, I mean, it's our Empire State Building. It's the recognizable architectural element that everybody knows about.
Yeah, so I think that's, I mean, the tower itself is, outside of people who live here, probably the most well-known thing, and that tower was definitely part of that.
Now, I remember when the story broke that it was coming down, part of the conversation was that the tower itself, while having shows, wasn't getting the marquee shows as much because the same the owners of the theater also own the Met in the city. And so, for example, I think like Madonna came 2 or 3 years ago, where 10 years ago, she probably would have come to the tower had that been the situation, but they had the Met, and that was a much more fitting environment. And other acts of that sort of, that would have normally have come to the tower are now going there instead. And Upward Arby is getting the second run. I guess it's not the word I want to use, but has there been any thoughts or conversation at all about that? Because I know that, you know, it helps to have that marquee structure to help let people know what's here. But if we don't have the marquee acts coming in, that kind of takes, I don't want to say takes the shine off, but I don't know where I'm really going with that. But I think that's a bit of a concern.
Yeah, I think that is a concern. I've heard that from other people. I've also heard from my daughter, who's in a pretty successful rock and roll band, that in the trade, they're thinking that perhaps as many as 90% of the venues after COVID will go under. So there's a huge change in the whole industry. But the fact that we have our graduations there, the fact that we could possibly do summer stage there, I think there are other possibilities for our community to use that facility. And, you know, it's certainly not a guarantee. People will still want to go see live music. So I personally think it's going to come back, but.
Oh, I don't disagree. Yeah, I just.
Yeah.
I think to Nick's point, I think Live Nation has been definitely prioritizing the money they put into
Live Nation, yeah.
They put into the Met. They've also had some issues recently, though, with, you know, they were in an agreement with the church that existed in that building, and I think the church actually has a lawsuit against them. But I think, speaking to what Nick said, I just think they have been prioritizing the Met in a lot of ways, and, you know, maybe we can get a narrative that kind of pushes some more marquee shows back.
And for performers, the Tower Theater is really well known. I mean, everybody's played there. And Patti Smith in her book just says, well, we just went to Upper Darby, as if everybody would know where Upper Darby was. You know, it's in her book, Just Kids. So at any rate, to wrap this up, do we think we have the skills among us to tackle some of these jobs? There are some very simple things to do, but they're kind of tedious. Like, one is to look at the 2014 list, and the list has been numbered in a different way, and it kind of messes things up for the state. And they'd like us to go back to their original numbering system. So that's a simple thing that just needs to be done. Compare the old numbers and renumber that list. Then we have to look and see if there's properties missing. We have to look at the properties that are on there. I certainly don't know all of them. I know that there are some properties on there, like there is at least one church on there that that's not particularly historic. I don't know why it's on there.
What church is that?
I don't have it I don't remember right here. I'd have to look it up.
Sure.
But it's one of the Catholic churches. And it seemed to me like somebody on the committee went to that church, so they put it on. You know, it didn't seem like that different.
So my church, St. Charles, is among the oldest in the region, if not the township, definitely the region, and could very well be that church. That's why I ask. The whole Kellyville neighborhood back there has a rich 19th century history. So I'd love to take a look at the list if you're able to send it over.
Yeah, sure. Cassie, are you there?
I am here. That
Yeah,
list is in the drive.
Do you-
Those documents are in the drive.
Do you remember when we looked at it, we noted that there was a church? You don't remember what it is, do you?
I'm not sure. I think I would have known. Did you say it's St. Charles? I think I would have known that if that was the one, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Steve, I can't remember what we were looking at.
Do you know what was the folder it was in?
I do know.
I can look at it later.
When I looked at it, it was not in folders. It was paper on a table. Sorry. I want to introduce another thing here, Steve. I'm sorry if I'm taking you out of the order of the agenda, because I think, you know, the two things that I think we've articulated is that we need to talk about getting the survey up to date so that we know what historic properties we have. And then we have to do an ordinance. And I would question whether we ought to get the ordinance done first with a draft of what properties are potential historic properties, as not to have any further accidents like we had with the Lukens. I assume that's an accident. Was that intended? I mean, that was an accident, right? That's what I've heard people say.
Well, there was no way to prevent it. There was nothing on the.
Yeah. It might have been prevented had we known, had we had an ordinance that the staff at the township could say, okay, we have to have a hearing on this. Is that correct? Is that the way it would go?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me see if I can share. my
Steve may
screen.
want to, I mean, Scott may want to say something.
No. Go ahead.
The two projects are necessarily joined together. When you think about what makes a historic property historic, you have properties that are historic because architecture, or they represent a community, or a person lived there, or an event happened there, and they may have national historical significance, in which case they're already on registers, or they might have statewide historical significance. But a building like the Lukens Inn, it's really, that's a great example. The Lukens family has some national significance, but
Yes.
that particular branch of it is far removed from that, the one out in Westchester,
The steel company.
steel company. This is a totally different branch of the family. They diverged from the Montgomery County roots way before then, but locally they were very significant. So if Upper Darby Township doesn't catalog and tag a building like that as significant, or some of the ones we've already lost, like the Fernwood Public School has a very rich and not always wonderful history in Upper Darby, but some of these things are positive. Some of these things are things we have to remember with a different tone, but they might have a very local significance. And so if you don't have them, if you don't identify them, right, then the ordinance wouldn't apply to them. And whereas, some of those other things may already be protected by other entities. So for a local ordinance to have effect, it really does need to have a catalog, survey with it.
So the survey, you think the survey needs to be updated first? Okay.
Well, I think you can do them concurrently. I mean, you guys can have subcommittees, however you want to do that. That's your prerogative. That's why the two projects are sort of spoken of in the same breath, is that the one feeds the other.
And I would just say, Scott, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. I would just say that inventories can take a lifetime if we don't keep some constraints around them. But anyway, witness the fact that our 2014 never got done.
Well, that's partly because there was objection to actually doing it. I'm going to try to share my screen and show you the latest survey. So if I can find it here.
I was wondering if you guys could also share the drive with us so we can also take a look at it.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to just scroll to the top and we'll just kind of quickly look through this. So cover page, acknowledgements. So there are a lot of people involved. Preservation planning here. Introduction. So this was all kind of done part by part, but this is pretty valid when we can reuse this. There's history in here already, right? Which is really nice. And when we get to the properties, Lawrence, this is actually not a bad list. It's just that they renumbered things by the age of the building. And it's recommended we go back to the initial numbering system because we're going to mess up the things that the state already has. But
Is this only in a Word doc or is this also in Excel?
this is just a Word doc. There probably is an Excel. All the pieces of this document are broken into separate, documents somewhere in that drive. That's one of the things that makes it confusing. But now you see St. Lawrence is one that's on there. My church isn't. I don't know why. Beverly Hills Presbyterian isn't on there. Here's a couple other churches. I mean, I almost think it's all or nothing, but
That is weird that Stonehurst Hills Methodist is on there. There's nothing architecturally great. I mean, I grew up around the corner from that. I played football in that every day after school. I went to Boy Scouts in that church. There is nothing architecturally remarkable about it. So I'm kind of curious as for why it's on there. St. Giles, that was where I went to preschool. I'm looking at that one. It's beautiful in there.
Right.
It's certainly more detailed than say the Stonehurst Hills Methodist. So I'm curious as for the assembly of this list, who put what on there and why.
Yeah.
And I don't want to argue against it. I'm just curious of why.
Right. The Drexel Brook Apartments is on there.
Mhm.
Well, Dick Clark lived there along with Ed McMahon.
So at any rate, here's more properties. I mean, so that's the list. And then there are separate documents with pictures of each property. I would have to do a share again to show you that. I just think that you probably just need to get the documents and look. It's going to take us too long here, but.
Agreed.
So do we have volunteers?
I'd love to take a look at that list and whatever sort of cataloging or whatever might need to take place.
Okay, good. I mean, my skills are, I'm not a photographer, but I can do pretty good photography. I have a good camera. And I work in visual communications. So anything, getting information out and styling it to the public as we do this, I think that's really important. I think we might, it might behoove us all to write a little bio of each of us and get some snapshots sometimes so we can have that, I'm hoping that we can get a page on the township's website and start communicating with the public about what we're doing, and social media, all of that is valuable to get support. The thing that I don't know anything about is money. There was obviously some money involved here. I don't know where the funds came from. I don't know if Scott has any ideas about that, but
Samia and I did fundraising from TAB. Like, I'm not sure if the fundraising would look different for this committee, but I would say like if like I wouldn't mind doing fundraisers.
Wow,
I agree with that. Yeah.
that's great. That would be really nice. How did you do it? You did it for an organization?
We did,
Do you
uh, yeah, I'll go. Okay. So we did it for Teen Advisory Board that happens in Municipal Library. So annually we would have many fundraisers for programs at the library. So we would most likely be in charge of the money and everything, organizing it.
Okay.
And to add on, since it was like in promotion to like the activities at the library, some of the stuff that we did was one of them was bracelets and keychains, and the other one that we did was bake sale on election day, which was like a huge hit because everyone would come to the library to vote, and then we could sell our baked goods.
That's great.
And we can also like help with social media. I mean,
Oh yeah,
pretty active on social media. So,
you're the age group.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're muted.
Okay, Bishop Thomas, what do you think about all of this?
Well, I'm definitely interested. I don't see how yet I would connect, but I'm enjoying the conversations, and not clear yet how I can contribute.
Do you think you have church members that have the kind of skills that might be interested in this, or historians, photographers, just people that want to help out?
Yes, that's possible. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe we can get some communication together about what we're looking for, get that to you so you can put it in your bulletin or announcements on Sunday. That would be really nice.
Great. Yes, that sounds good.
I know your church engaged with the community from the beginning, and I thought that was really great. Not that I've met you before, but I heard about many things that you were involved with, and I think that's great. Anyone else before we wrap it up?
No, I just had a quick question. Scott, maybe you could even address this. I know one of the things that were talked about late last year, this is more down along the Swedish cabin, with regards to the Darby Creek Valley Association and the preservation of the trails along the cabin, that there was talk of a bridge crossing the creek from Gillespie Park over to the cabin, but there was some conversation as far as for the preservation of the environment from both historical context and, of course, environmental context. Is there any update or is there any sort of information with regard to that bridge being constructed, or is that dead in the water? No pun intended there. Where we may be with that?
I have no information one way or the other on that, but I'll get together with the department heads who may have information on that and check with the CAO and just search around and see what I can find out. The administration, someone in the administration is going to have some idea about it.
Sure.
I'd be happy to report back to this group when I have something, because first I'm hearing about it. But
Oh, okay, yeah. There's something about the natural elevation over by the cabin, but there was concerns with, from aesthetic standpoint, having that bridge, how that would be married into it.
yeah, it sounds like Public Works may have done some analysis on that, so they may have some information. It may
Okay.
be, Leisure Services may have some information on that, since they manage some of the properties directly. But I'll find out what I can find out and report back. But the mayor did want me to pass on her hopes for this group. She hopes you guys can do some good things for Upper Darby, and quote, onward and upward was her exhortation to you all. So I'm impressed by what I'm seeing, and I'll certainly relay that to her if she doesn't get a chance to watch this video herself.
So we basically have a blank check.
A blank check within the, yes, within the purview of the organization as defined by council, but obviously there's space for other things. Lots of work to do, and I think you're an impressive group, and we're looking forward to seeing what you guys can do.
Okay.
May I ask a process question and timing question? So our next meeting's not for a while, is that correct?
Correct. So the and your next question is, how are you going to get this stuff done in between?
Exactly, that's exactly right, Scott.
I think what I'll do is I'll send you guys an email about, you know, some of the Sunshine Act requirements, what you can and can't do in between meetings. Certainly, if you decide as a body here to take on these projects, which it sounds like that's you know, if I'm reading right, that's the consensus that you guys have come to. It's certainly appropriate to assign, you know, administrative tasks and follow up and say, okay, like, who's going to step up and handle this section of the survey and kind of do some of that work in between the meeting. And then if you could appoint a subcommittee, you could just, individual members of the body could take on some of the work and then report back to the group. And then really what you need to be mindful of is when you're making decisions and deliberating about those decisions. That's broadly speaking the part you have to worry about. Of course, I'm not an attorney, so I'm just broadly speaking here, but I can certainly get you guys a little bit of guidance on how to be careful about how you communicate with each other in between meetings. But there's certainly there's certainly nothing to stop you from doing this kind of, you know, you got to read through the list, you got to mark things off, you got to, you know, it's administrative work, it's research work. It's not something that you have to worry about being in a meeting to do, but you should be prepared to report back to the group. I think if that sort of gets at what you were, does that answer your question? The details are left to you guys to decide, but that's sort of the
It does, and Steve knows this, and you may as well, Scott. But so my background is in libraries, and I know how to classify materials and artifacts, and it's important, and I'm sure Bart does as well. What I am aware of is when you're doing cataloging, you have to be very careful about controlled vocabulary, making sure you don't, if you have a whole bunch of volunteers involved, then you've got a whole bunch of volunteers with the same, using different techniques. And since most of the work is already done, we might be able to concatenate this or condense it. So I think we want to talk about process and how many people involved, because if it gets to be too many people, it becomes unmanageable. You end up having to manage people rather than content. And it seems like we're awfully close to being done. Sorry.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I said I was, you know, not thinking of it in that context. I'd gladly yield the responsibility of cataloging to you and or Bart with your skill set seems to be much more suited towards than me trying to take over. Although, like you said, it looks like it's pretty much already done.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just curious more on looking over the list and actually cataloging it. So by all means, I have no qualms in giving that up to.
Well, and I'm not necessarily saying I want it either, because I've done a gracious plenty in my career. But my point is we need to be careful about the resource pool that's involved and making sure that they're properly trained so we get the result we want.
I think your point is very well taken. And certainly any kind of shared effort, version control of documents becomes important even outside of the library cataloging history world. But if I remember the conversation I had with Kate Clifford, you know, some of the work of the survey, right? I mean, there's the person who's sort of keeping control of the lists and the style and the format, but there's a lot of work of, hey, can someone drive to that property and see it? Is it still in the condition we think it is, right? So you could say, you know, Mr. Hoyt could be in charge of Garrettford, you know, driving around. Here's a list of 8 properties in the Garrettford area that we need someone to just go physically and put eyes on. Bart, you know, go to Highland Park, and you know, you could sort of divide up that sort of field work and have one person be in control of cataloging it, making sure it's presented in the right format. But that's just one possible way to break up some of that labor. Ultimately, it's for you guys to decide how you want to do it, and who's willing to do what kind of work, obviously.
It's a project, needs a project manager to make sure all the pieces are falling right.
If there's anything I can do to facilitate the efforts, I mean, administratively, obviously, you know, I'm here to make it easier for you.
That's great. So back to the timing then, when's our next meeting? I mean, how are we gonna take the next step?
So is it permissible? Now, I felt up until this point, because of the public disclosure things Scott was talking about, I thought we couldn't really get together and discuss things unless it was in public. But it's sounding like we can go out and have work groups work on specific projects. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, so if you think about when, say, a group like Township Council has their public meetings and they have their public committee meetings, they meet as a body. In between, they met 2 or 3 council members may get together to kind of work on the project that they present to the body, right? There's work that gets done in between. They take meetings with experts, or they gather information from the public, and then they come to the council meeting prepared to speak about the given resolution or the given ordinance. It doesn't mean you don't do anything in between or that you can't talk to each other in some way. You just can't deliberate and make decisions and do things of that nature. You can certainly assign homework if you do it here, right? So I think that's.
Okay. All right. So back, Nick, I think there is a part that you can definitely do, and that's just to reconcile those 2 numbering systems. That won't be changing anything or cataloging different. That would be really, that's a nice little project. And Kathy, if you can, would you like to work with me on kind of deciding how to proceed on that work?
Like a project plan?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then we can start enlisting people for specific things,
Mhm.
you know? Like, one of the things that would be easy for me is to go to some of these properties and take the photographs, you know? I'd be interested in doing that. I did a little test. I tried to do that. But like, my primary interest in the beginning of this was to get 69th Street designated a historic Art Deco district, and to renovate whatever we can. I think it could be a jewel. Get that Horner and Hardt's exposed again. Get the front, the chicken place signage in line with the Horner and Hardt's. Maybe get a bakery as a tenant. Horner and Hardt's used to make bakery as well as serve food. That's the kind of thing that, you know, I think that we can talk about as goals. I think people might get excited about that. I'd like to see that 69th Street Bridge come down so we can see those beautiful buildings. It's not ADA compliant anyway, and you just make the street safer to cross, which would, you know, all over Philadelphia, people cross streets like that. You don't need that bridge, I personally think. It's things like that that, you know, even like what Studio Movie Grill did on their own without anybody asking them to. They tried to match their architecture to the Art Deco period. They were interested in that. That was great, you know. There are other little pockets, other commercial areas here also have some Art Deco treasures. And so it's not just 69th Street, but. All right. Shall we adjourn?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All right. Thank you so much for coming. I'm sure Bart will get me all of your emails, and then we'll see where we can go from here.
And
Scott.
just a bit of housekeeping, your next meeting is scheduled for September 14th.
Okay. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thanks
It
for
was
being
really
here.
nice meeting you guys.
It was very nice.
I
Good to see you guys.